Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. Today's guest is Margaret Brown, leadership expert, executive coach, and the author of a new book called Culture Pays, which I've thoroughly enjoyed reading. With over 35 years of experience helping organizations improve leadership, engagement, and workplace culture. In a book, she introduces the 5 L's framework for people first leadership and explores how leaders can create environments where people genuinely thrive. In this episode, we'll be talking about leadership blind spots, employee engagement, why so many culture change initiatives fail, and what leaders can practically do to build stronger and healthy organization. So, Margaret, thank you so much for joining us. It's genuinely an honor to have you on, and I really loved the book. So, thank you.
Oh, well, the honour is all mine. Thank you so much, Sid. It's an absolute pleasure to join you.
Thank you. So, I'm really want to know a bit more about yourself and what really inspired you to write the book called Culture Pays.
Oh, that's a good question. In fact, the reason I wrote the book probably started about 40, 50 years ago. When I had my first jobs working as a student, and I did some very menial jobs, like I was a cleaner in a care home. I worked in the plate wash in hotels. And I just remember then feeling how badly I was treated. Like, not even badly, just indifferently, like I didn't matter, I wasn't there, I wasn't worthy of a good morning, you would get orders shouted at you. And I just remember back then feeling, this is really wrong. And and realizing then that some people go through their entire working lives being treated like that, and particularly if they're not in highly responsible jobs. At the time, I was a university student, and I never once said to any of my employers, look, I'm actually doing a degree. Does that make any difference to how you treat me? I never said that. To them, I was just the cleaner or just the dishwasher. And I think I knew a way back then that I was destined to do something about it. So whilst it maybe inspired me to write my book, it took about 40 years to get around to it. But I had the accumulation throughout that whole time of experiencing good and bad leadership and how it impacted on me and how it made me behave. So if I was treated badly, I didn't produce well. If I was treated really well, I went the extra mile and I gave my best. Really quite simple.
No, really clear. And it's so important, like you mentioned in the book as well, like leaders need to like treat their employees as like their own people rather than just seeing them as how just to just assign them tasks, basically.
Exactly. I mean, your family, we all know that if we treat our children badly, they're not going to grow up into confident, contributing adults. And so why should that be any different especially as we spend most of our waking lives at work? Um,
Exactly.
so yes, if you want the best out of people, it's really quite simple. Treat them with respect, treat them how they want to be treated, and you will get the best out of them.
Yeah, 100%. And all of the jobs that you have done previously in the 40 years. So what inspired you to really specialize in leadership? You could have gone anywhere, right? In strategy, consulting, but why leadership?
Well, funnily enough, when I started, I had many jobs. My background was in sales. And when I had my first baby, I needed to figure out how I could work around the baby. And if I had a real job, a normal job, it probably wouldn't cover childcare. I was the main breadwinner, so it wouldn't be enough to cover childcare and the mortgage and everything else. So I thought the only way I can do this is really to become a bit of an entrepreneur and work for myself. So I started running sales training courses for a small business startup at our local enterprise trust. And that grew really quickly. And it was perfect because I could work around the baby. I could do all my preparation in the evenings. And I just needed to pay for childcare when I was physically training. And that went really well. And the Enterprise Trust asked me to run customer care training as well. I'm cutting a very long story short here. And through that, I was offered, I won a contract to do customer care training for an IT company all around the UK. And it was the biggest learning ever because every single time I ran that 1 day customer care training course, it was just a management bashing session. They all said, it's the leaders who need to be here. And I learned then that you cannot have outstanding customer service with a demotivated workforce. So again, through that same contract, I was introduced to a London-based leadership training company who'd won a contract in Aberdeen where I live. And they were introduced to me and asked if I would help them on a major contract they'd got with a global oil and gas company. So they were running service excellence for their huge IT function around the world to provide a better service to the other employees of that company. And it started at the top. So they started with interviewing employees and clients. And then they took the leadership team away with me, and they shared all that feedback with the leadership team, which was a major, major eye-opener as to why service wasn't good. And that was it. And that was about 1994. And
Wow.
yeah, that started my upward trajectory. I thought, this is it. I've found the thing. And so I would work with every level of leadership around the world with that company, gathering feedback, working with the leadership team, creating commitments that would address the poor motivation of employees and how that was impacting on customer service. So yeah, that was the start of my leadership journey.
Amazing. And that's what you mentioned in the book as well. So many different case studies, your life experiences, plus different focus group comments from different people. So I really want to know a bit more about the 5 L's that you've mentioned in the book. So what are the 5 L's, and tell us a bit more about that.
Well, it's very interesting, Sid, because obviously leadership's not a process. Leadership's messy and it's very complex. It's very easy for leaders to set targets on business targets and technical targets. You can measure those. It's much harder to do that with managing people because we're fickle, we're human and we're fickle. And none of us deliberately sets out to do a bad job. And none of the leaders I work with deliberately set out to make their employees feel undervalued. Never an intention. So we've got different beliefs, different opinions, different backgrounds, different generations. And there's just so many components that make it very difficult. However, I have found, particularly when I work with engineering, oil and gas has been one of my main client bases because I live in Aberdeen, which has traditionally been an oil and gas city. And they like a process. But I thought, but leadership's not a process. But when I looked into it, I thought, actually, even though I do everything bespoke for my clients, I do follow a process. And I came up with the 5 L's because it helps leaders to stay on track with all the things they need to do. So it's a 5-step method, but none of them are standalone. They all interact with each other. And it starts with listening. So the 5 L's start with listening. So I have to listen to my clients, first of all. What are your pain points? What are your objectives? What are your frustrations? And listen to what they say. And based on what they say, I say, look, we can't assume anything. We need to go out and listen to what all your stakeholders are saying. So let's start off by asking employees what they need. What are their blockers? What's stopping them doing their best work? Why might they be considering leaving, for example? And we gather a huge amount of feedback from employees, and then we work with the leadership team. And the second L is learn. What do we learn from what we've heard from these employees? And what do I need to learn about me as a leader to be the best leader I can be? So we learn from feedback. We learn from reading, podcasts, observing other great leaders. And what do we need to do? And then the third L is lead. So now we know all these great things that we need to be doing. How do we really go out and lead with vision and passion and get people bought into the direction of the company and feeling like they're part of something important? That's been proven to be a huge motivator, by the way. People feeling that they're part of something special, like NASA. I'm going to use this example very
Yep.
quickly because I love it. When President Kennedy had this massive vision that a man would walk on the moon and come back to Earth alive, the whole country was galvanized behind that vision. And there were some dignitaries touring NASA one day, and they said to a janitor, "And what are you doing here?" And he said, "I'm helping to put a man on the moon." So he felt like an important part of that huge big picture. And if I had been in my days of working as a cleaner, felt that I was part of something special in creating the best environment for people to work in, I'd have given more. So that's the third L, is leading with passion, getting people behind your vision. And the fourth one is leverage. So how do we get the best out of the potential that's in our workforce that's untapped? And I can promise almost anyone that's listening to this that we haven't scratched the surface of people's potential. So where are their skills? Where are their skill gaps? Where are the creative people? Where are the technical people? Where are the innovative people? And really pull all those things together to get the best out of our team. Do we delegate effectively? Do we know how to delegate? So all these things about leveraging the best from our people. And then the fifth L is live. So living by authentic values and actually living by them so they're not just a poster campaign. So every company has value statements. And when we look at the feedback, when we go back to listening and match it against the value statements, they don't usually match up. So that's the fifth L, is really embedding and working by real values. And if you pull all those together, there's actually, as a result, there's a sixth value, which is legacy. How do I want to be remembered as a leader? So as I say, those five L's, although they follow a logical pattern, none of them are standalone. We should be looking at our values every day. We should be listening every day. Listening is the foundation.
I love that. And I think you mentioned the story in the book where you were in an organization where they had the value, leadership value is like treat people with dignity and respect, right? And you were in the lift. And when you reached the third floor, the managing director came into the lift, but he never greeted anyone
No,
in the lift. And you mentioned in the book that you have to be living those values on a daily basis. Then
exactly.
that helps to create the culture, right? What's your take on that?
Well, that's 100% because we have these nice value statements. And I just think when I speak to employees, I will bring the value statements up and say, how do you see your leaders demonstrating that they believe in these values? And they say, well, things like, well, we don't. Their values are all about making money. That's all they care about. That's their perception. It might not be the reality, but that's what they tend to hear because it's a measure and it's a very important, obviously it's the most important thing, but your profits are the result of creating a fantastic culture. The culture is the enabler for superior competitive advantage. So I work very closely with the values when I'm working with a client, with a leadership team. We always have the values up and we say, right, let's take this one, treat people with dignity and respect. How many of you want to be treated with dignity and respect? And of course, everyone raises their hand. And I've asked that question of thousands of people around the world. And I've never met one person, whatever they do in their organization, that doesn't want to be treated with respect. So we then talk about, well, how do we bring that to life? And it's just simple things, Sid. It's things like knowing people's names, saying good morning to them, being interested in them, a bit of compassion if they're going through something difficult in their lives. So how do we bring these to life so they're not just a poster campaign? Otherwise, let's just tear them up. Or, right, what we really mean is we'll treat you with respect if you deliver superior shareholder value. So yes, that I feel that that's one of the most important things. And you're right, that managing director, he was actually a really good guy. And his head was probably full of multiple responsibilities and who knows what was in his mind. He came into the lift and yeah, he just ignored them all. And these statements were on the wall, in the lift wall. However, my meeting
Right.
that I was going to that day was actually with the chief executive to talk
Right.
about with the company. So I did mention that a senior member of the executive team had kind of negated his lovely values. And he was very receptive to that. He was a real people person. So it was a perfect example of how the small things can make
Yeah,
such a difference.
definitely. And you mentioned in the book as well, behavior breeds behavior, right? So if the leader behaves in a way of that he's respecting the values, that's how the team members or the people around will behave as well, right?
Yes, and the converse is equally true. If you have a leader with a command and control type of style, anyone that wants to get on in the company thinks that's how they have to leave. So then you create a culture where people are telling you what to do, they're scolding you when you get things wrong, that type of thing. So my way or the highway. Um, I see less of that. Well, I was going to say I see less of that now, but I kind of feel in the world at the moment we're seeing a lot more of that kind of leadership. And
Right.
it's very damaging and very, very costly.
Right. And why do you think this is the case in terms of why do you think like people at the top are having this profit first mentality and not treating the employees well?
Okay, that's a really good question. I mean, broadly speaking, I think there are two types of leadership in the world leaders. There are those that are motivated by their own self serving agendas, and they tend to not listen to podcasts like this. They tend not to read books like Culture Pays because they believe they're right. And then the other type is the kind that wants to make a difference and has good intentions. Now, within that second type, there are countless styles of leadership, and we're often getting it wrong. And that's often just lack of awareness. But I can usually tell quite quickly if someone's heart is in the right place and they have good intentions. And then we can work together and raise that awareness. But I think what we're seeing in the world, and obviously is very visible on the political stage, but I see it a lot in corporate as well, the very top of corporate, where the profits are so huge. And if you're motivated by what can I get, then they don't really care if you step over to get what they want. But if we could just understand that actually you could still have all that and maybe even more if your workforce was thriving because they would be contributing, they'd be staying. It's very expensive to lose people. They'd be staying, they'd be coming forward with ideas. So actually, in the longer term, you can still have all those benefits and and wealth if that's what you're motivated by, and still leave a legacy of being, you know, somebody that was a good leader.
Yep.
Why would you not do that?
No, that's a very good explanation and makes sense. And just coming back to the five L's, it's interesting to see that all the five L's are basically behavioral traits. It's not like the employee saying, "Oh, I need my manager to be competent in Excel or competent in PowerPoint." It's more on these behavioral traits. Why do you think it's based on behavior rather than technical skills?
Well, I think, as we said at the beginning, you can measure technical skills. They're the logic. So you've got your logic piece. There's a model in my book called the Transformational Leader Model. And to have the competitive advantage, I think you have to have three key areas in equal balance. So your business acumen, that's everything about running your business, commercial savvy, legal adherence, all those type of things. So everything that's to do with running the business. If you don't get that piece right, the business is going to fail. And then you have technical excellence. That's the bedrock of what you do. So it goes without saying that we need technical excellence. So whether that's making cars or selling mortgages or cutting hair or making cupcakes or drilling for oil, you have to have the technical excellence. And then the
Hmm.
third one that needs to be in equal balance is the values and behaviors. And they're the enablers, but they are the hardest to do. It's ironic that they're called soft skills. The important thing for leaders to remember is that their competitors also have the same potential access to technology, infrastructure, potential employees, potential clients. So that EQ piece, the leadership, the values, and the behaviors, that is your differentiator. Because if you get that piece right, they will deliver even better technical excellence and even better business adherence. So I think getting that piece right is going to give that competitive advantage and with a measurable bottom line impact.
No, interesting. If the employees are happy, they'll more focus on learning the technical skills and performing better, right? So it
Exactly.
goes makes
Exactly.
sense. Makes
Yeah.
sense.
I did a lot of work as a student in those days, working as a waitress in a hotel. And I actually really enjoyed it. I regarded it as an art. But my view in hospitality, which is very much about a wonderful experience for the customers, in my opinion, if you treat the customers well, they're going to stay, they're going to spread a better reputation. So my view when employing waiting staff, dining staff, was if they've got a good attitude, they will learn the skills. They'll learn the skills like you put the plate down from the left and you clear from the right, all those kinds of things. But if they really want to do a good job, they will learn the skills and will be better. So
Mm.
interestingly, I'm often asked with my clients to help with the interviewing process. So they'll have a set of CVs with all the technical background, um, but how they fit into the team and the values of the company is that little secret sauce that I'm asked to help with, because one team member with a bad attitude can really affect the whole team. I've left a company because a team member with a poisonous attitude. It wasn't being managed by our boss. So I left.
I know this is not part of the podcast, but how do you know, like, if someone is looking at the CV, or do you basically interview them and then you get the
Yes.
sense of whether
Yes.
that's a fit or not, right?
Yes. Face to face. And if they have things on their CV, like they've done volunteering or they're, I interviewed one wonderful lady for a renewables company, and she'd taken a bunch of school kids kayaking in Canada and whitewater rafting,
Wow,
and teaching them outdoor leadership skills and things. She was out and away the best candidate, but the technical CVs were very similar. And one for the same company, I interviewed one gentleman who had quite an arrogant attitude, and I thought, there's just no way you're going to fit into this company because you can't come in believing you're better than everyone else. So his technical CV was excellent, but I just knew he wouldn't fit. So she got the job based on her
nice.
way and how she interacted, and yeah, interesting. Again, there's no it is not an exacting science. And for a lot of leaders embarking on a culture program, to an extent, it is a leap of faith. You just have to know it's the right thing to do because it's a long term thing. What we tend to do is month on month numbers and shareholder value because we can count that, we can measure it, and it looks good. So the margins, you want the margins to look good. So that's more short term thinking. It's a leap of to invest in really building up your people and your culture, but just know it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And just coming back to the five L's. So, out of the five L's, what do you think? Which of the five L's leaders would struggle the most with?
Gosh, that's a great question. I mean, I could say all of them, but I would say obviously listening underpins everything, which means going out and asking questions. But I think if I had to pick one that you would struggle with, it probably is living by these values on a day to day basis and really living by them authentically. Because you have to remember, I mean, leaders are under a lot of pressure. And I make no mistake about that. I mean, I know that my clients are very, very busy people, very intelligent people, so making time to just remember to say good morning and all these little things that don't seem very consequential, um, it's a constant awareness program. And so I think that's maybe the thing they struggle with the most, is to remember it's not just business as usual. We have to embed these kind of things in and around our big business goals.
Right. And I think you mentioned in the book whether that's what was the thing you mentioned? Yes, you mentioned in the book where one organizations were doing like Good News Monday, where they were spreading positivities from start of the week to like really set the value of, recognition, for
Yes.
example. And then I think you also mentioned in the book where it's starting the meeting, for example, with the values, etc. So what are the things that leaders could do to be more self-aware with the values?
That's a great question. And the great news for leaders is it doesn't cost anything. If you're looking for some silver bullet, impressive academic, highbrow leadership fix, you don't need it. Most of us know these things, but what we don't do is do them because we've got the best intentions. So yes, so the one you mentioned there, Sid from the book, was actually a company my daughter worked for in Australia for 6 years, and her boss, the managing partner of the firm, used to get everyone on Teams in the morning because they were in multiple cities, and it was just called Good News Monday. It was a half-hour call, and he would talk about all the good things that happened the last week. He would pass on good news from clients. He would pass on, if they did, for example, gained a new client, he thanked the people by name who contributed to that. He then opened up to the other partners and asked them what they would like to share, and would anyone else like to share something they appreciated. So they didn't talk about work. It was just purely about sharing good news and congratulating someone who maybe got engaged or had a baby and all that kind
Nice.
of thing. So yes, it just set the tone for a really positive start to the week.
And it always comes from the top, right? To the
Absolutely. The culture is set from the top. And I don't care if that's a family or a corner shop or a corporation or even a country. The person at the top sets the tone.
clear. Loud and
And
clear.
by the way, I should probably mention here I'm completely apolitical. I've never aligned with any political party. I've always been about the leader rather than the party. And none of them are always going to get it right. I mean, I don't think there's any political leader that will always make everybody happy. But I will align with the one that I believe really wants to make a difference. So I should make that clear. I'm completely apolitical.
Yep, sounds good. And according to you, like what's the biggest misconception leaders have about organizational culture?
I think the biggest misconception they have is not an HR initiative. It
What do you
follows
mean?
on Well, it follows on from your last question, Sid, that the culture comes from the top. It's a CEO issue. But a lot of people make it about an HR initiative. We're going to do leadership training. So they maybe bring in some expensive consultants and they do leadership training, and which is often very good and often very enjoyable. But does anything actually change? If the people at the top are not walking these values all the time, then all leadership training is going to be of no value, because people are saying, well, we went on that very expensive training course and we were told that we had to do this, this, and this, but I don't see my boss doing these things. So you have to embed it at the top first. And it's not, I mean, quite often, I mean, my point of contact will be the HR director, because they are often tasked with finding people that can help support the cultural initiatives. But I'm very clear with my when I meet the sponsor in the C-suite, I will say, I can only work with you if you're completely committed to owning the feedback. You know, once I've explained how we do this, and it's not going to be easy. It's simple. It's very simple, but it's not easy because we're often having to unlearn old behaviours as well as learning new behaviours. But as I say, the good news is it's these actual leadership behaviours are cost-free, completely cost-free. And you mentioned earlier on, you were absolutely right, to maybe start meetings with little stories that align to the values and mentioning people by name. Because often meetings just start as a process with, right, let's look at our numbers for the last month. How are we doing? Are we on target? And so on. That's what people hear. Whereas if we just start, before we start the meeting, we're doing very well this month, but I'd just like to recognise Sid, because this week Sid did something quite remarkable, which tied in with our community values. Well done, Sid. And it's got to be genuine. It can't be, it might feel a little bit contrived if we're not used to doing these things. But if your intention is absolutely genuine, that actually, yes, I'm not doing this to tick a box. I've done the values piece on the meeting. I actually mean it. And I also say to my clients when we've been through something like this, if you're not accustomed to recognizing people and being genuine about it, there might be a little bit of skepticism. You might hear people say, they've obviously been on a course, or let's see how long this lasts. And it can be quite hurtful when you've gone through a real realization, and just know that it's the right thing to do and say, yes, you're right. I have been on a course and I learned that I need to do things differently. I'm committed to doing that. And I'm happy for you to pull me up if I slip back. So just rise above it, and eventually that skepticism will fade away. And I'll think, actually, this is great.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's a really clear example on that as well. And for engagement, for example, so you also mentioned in the start of the book, like it's costing organizations over 8 trillion. So why is low engagement costing organizations so much?
right. Well, yes. So many leaders are shocked by this. So I follow Gallup very closely because they do the most extensive global employee survey. So every year they survey 2 million employees around the world. And it's a very in-depth survey. And last year, they found that globally 59% of people were what they call quiet quitting. And the clue's in the word quiet. We don't know that they're not happy. We don't know that they're disengaging. Um, and they're at work, they're logged on, they're turning up, but they're not giving much. They're there to get paid. And last year, it cost the global economy $8.9 trillion. This year, so I wrote, the book was published in January, and just not long after that, the most recent 25-26 survey just dropped, and it's up to $10 trillion. So last year, in the year 25-26, quiet quitting costs the global economy $10 trillion, or 9% of global GDP. This represents a massive, massive opportunity for leaders. Because as I said, the clue's in the word quiet, which is where the listening comes in. What do you need from us to do your best? What are we missing? What are the blockers? And this is a real hard number. And it just people think, well, how can it possibly be that much? Well, just to put it in perspective, if somebody leaves, it costs approximately 1.5 times their salary to replace them with all the training and the advertising. If it's a senior person, it's about 2.5 times their salary. Not to mention the reputation, being bad news travels very fast. You want a company with a good reputation because that attracts more customers as well as employees. So all these things like drops in productivity, people not coming forward with ideas, your reputation declining, that's where that $10 trillion comes from. And if anyone has ever watched the program Undercover Boss,
Mhm.
that brings it into sharp focus. I effectively am the undercover boss for my by going and
That would
find.
be such a good book title as well,
Yeah,
Undercover Boss.
yeah, exactly. Well, I think that there's a series in the US and the UK, and I think it's probably on Netflix or somewhere, but it's worth watching because the boss, the chief executive, goes undercover in disguise and works in the front line for a month, and
Oh,
they make radical changes based on what they experience, actually living and working and listening to the employees. It's very humbling. It's a
yeah,
humbling experience.
I need to watch it for sure. I think it'll be so
Yeah,
many leadership lessons there
yeah.
that we can learn from.
And as I said, I want to emphasize that most of these leaders have good intentions. And it is a humbling experience for them because they're doing their best. They're not waking up in the morning saying, right, I'm going to go in and make everyone really unhappy and miserable today. Um, as I said, the people that have that mindset don't typically go on leadership training programs or listen to leadership podcasts or things like that because they don't think they need to. I've always found that people who least think they need to develop their leadership are that least need to are the ones that most do. They have the biggest negative impact.
Yeah, totally. And have you watched The Undercover Boss, by the way?
I have. I watched it when it was on television. If it was, I don't generally like reality television, but I really like that one because it's obviously relevant to what I do.
So if you remember from the episode you watched or something like that, do you remember like in that episode or overall, what was the common theme of what the employees were telling about the leader that the leader wasn't doing?
Well, the common theme was that they had absolutely no idea how many of their employees were struggling to. They often had second jobs. They were maybe going through really difficult personal stuff, but they were still turning up and doing great work. Some of them were real stars. And at the end of the program, they'd be called into the chief executive's boardroom office when he was out of disguise. It was usually a he, out of disguise. And they thought, oh my goodness, this is really terrifying. He worked with me. What did I say? But but usually what's happened is they're complimented on how much the chief executive learned from that person, how it opened their eyes up and the improvements that they made, and often they promoted these people and maybe rewarded them in some special way to say thank you. It was an eye opener for them. But the common theme was they had no concept of what people were doing and what they needed and how much many of them were struggling.
Right. It makes sense. And also from the employee engagement, all the focus groups that I've done, Margaret, for different organizations. So what is what are the employees craving most from the leaders right now that they are still aren't getting it?
Think it goes back to listening again. They want to feel heard. They want to feel valued. They want to feel properly rewarded for what they do. I mean, this mantra now of do more with less is so destructive. People are burning out. They're stressed. They're still having to deliver with less resources. And I think that's a huge and very expensive mistake. It might, again, look good month on month, cut head count. I think that's a horrible term, very inhuman. Cut head count. I hear that a lot. And yes, it might look good on paper month on month, but the long term cost that $10 trillion is at the back of your head all the time once you know it. And I should say as well, one of the questions I ask employees in terms of a metric is I ask, have you ever considered leaving this company for reasons other than unavoidable personal circumstances? And almost always over half say, yes, I have considered it, unless they're or even actively looking to leave, which ties in exactly with the Gallup poll of 59% of people globally quiet quitting. So when you've shared that $10 trillion number with a leadership team, and then you bring in their own metric, which marries up with the Gallup one, then they think, okay, we do need to look at this. This is not just soft, fluffy, nice to have. This is a differentiator.
Wow. And then, according to you, like, what, I think you mentioned in the book where you were in an organization where the change initiative failed, and then you had to take over and then fix the change initiative. So, why do you think like these culture change initiatives usually fail?
I think they fail for multiple reasons. I think they fail because, like, as we said earlier, leaders have traditionally, they've worked in a certain way and they've done very well. And they're almost having to unlearn an old way of working, or rather bring in new ways of doing things, and being very human centric. And that's very, very difficult to have that awareness every single day. And I say that to employees if they're complaining and moaning about their leaders. Well, hang on. I know they've done this, 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 and this. They listen to you. They've made all these changes. They're human. What are you doing now to support them? What are you doing to make a difference? So, and one of the things we do is we maybe align the new behaviours to the appraisal system as well. So with having quite exacting behavioural standards that we can measure people on. But the most important thing to keep the momentum going is accountability. So most leadership teams I work with, they, by their choice, I don't tell them to do this, they realise how important it is, and they make it a priority. So at the top, the first item on their monthly meeting agendas or their weekly meeting agendas is, what are we doing with the commitments we made, the behavioural commitments we made in line with our values? So we made a commitment to be more visible. How many of us have been out this week and just said hello to people and dropped past their desk and asked what they need? So they make it very real and they keep it on the agenda of their leadership meetings. Because yes, you're right, Sid, it's very hard to sustain it. And especially if there's been quite an investment in maybe bringing in somebody like me to help them. And there's some financial outlay for that piece just to get it going. I feel so strong that there has to be a really measurable return on investment for that. So I feel very committed as well to supporting them through that and encouraging them.
And according to you, like, how long does it take to really do a transformation to a positive culture change, approx?
Well, it depends on the size of the company, but I would say 2 to 3 years.
Minimum.
I would say, yeah, yes. And the other thing that can stop it working is if you get a change of leadership at the top. So once leaders understand how huge this is to the success of their company, they're very clear that this is not opt in or opt out. This is the way we work here. We do work by our values. They're clear. We work this way. And if people don't like to work that way, they often find that they themselves choose to not be part of it. But once you get that momentum going, people think, this is how we want to work. This is great. I've heard so many wonderful comments when we follow up at the end of a program. Of one gentleman said, I left the company to go for a higher paid job, but I came back.
Yeah.
We had him back. They said, you don't realize what you've got until you don't have it anymore, when you have this kind of wonderful culture. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that. So basically, it's a perfect transition to the question I want to ask you. And next is if you can share a real life example on where culture transformation happened successfully.
Yeah. I think my best one was, I did work with it was an oil and gas company where it was a second level. It wasn't one of the top. I've worked with some of the big majors, but this one was a sort of second tier one. And I worked with the European division of this company. And when I started working with them, and they were already a very good company, by the way. This was a good to great, not a failing to flourishing. um, they were already a good company to work for. Their staff turnover was around 12%. Um, and when I finished work, and this took 3 years, when I finished working with them, their staff turnover was under 1%. And they were
Wow.
rated at number 8, Sunday Times top 100 companies to work for. And at recruitment fairs, they had the longest queues because they had a reputation now. It's a great company to work. I want to work for them. So this gives you a competitive advantage as well, because if you have a reputation for being a great place to work, you can attract the best talent as well. So they were a wonderful company to work for. And we co-wrote a paper to present at the Offshore Europe conference, which is the biggest energy conference outside of Houston. And we were asked to present this at the conference because other companies wanted to know, how did you do that? How did you get the culture like this? But it took 3 years.
3 years. Okay, so explain me on a yearly basis. So, for example, on day one, what happened in this organization when you walked in? So, did you do just the focus groups, listening, and you started from there?
Yeah, pretty much. Well, that company originally appointed me to facilitate a meeting of their leadership team. They wanted to really determine what their vision was for the next 10 years. They asked me to come in and facilitate them coming up with that vision, crafting it into a statement that they could all support. And believe me, this was not an easy task. I think there were 19 senior managers away for 2 days with engineering brains and very intelligent, all used to metrics. Where are the metrics? No, the metrics are, you go and put the metrics this later. But what you're doing will support the vision. So we need to agree on our vision. Where do we want to be 10 years from now if we take a step into the future? And then you go away and put your strategy underneath that. Anyway, they came up with a really excellent vision, and the HR director and the vice president for that region liked the way I worked, and they asked if I would come in and work with them to really embed a great leadership culture. So I did exactly that. I went out and interviewed employees with focus groups and one-to-ones, and we created a big picture. The leadership team went away, and they got it like that. They hit the road running with it. I think there was only one that was pushing back for a while, but the others were holding him accountable. So he did get on board with the program and actually decided this is actually a much better way to work, because the results spoke for themselves. People were becoming more productive, more motivated. Absenteeism was dropping, but it was all the small things they did that really transformed the culture. There was a huge offshore population, and I did go out to the platforms and I spoke to people out there. That in itself was a first, because they said nobody ever comes out here. So that itself made a massive difference. And I listened to them, and they were telling me things like the pool table's been torn and broken for 2 years. The ice cream machine hasn't worked for a year. And it was just things like that. And because we shared that feedback in depth with the leadership team, they made the decision to start visiting the platforms, not just to visit the platform managers, but to sit in the galley and speak to the offshore workers. And I just remember when we followed up a year later, this gentleman in the control room saying, "At last, someone's listening to us. We've got the pool table fixed, we've got the ice cream machine fixed." And the vice president said, "I can't believe it's just these small things." He said, "It cost us nothing." I said, "It's because they feel they're being listened to. They're out there in a dangerous environment, away from their families, doing 12-hour shifts, and they now believe that their well-being matters to you." And they did amazing things. They would phone the platforms on Christmas Day and have the phone passed around and speak to people, thank them for working over Christmas. They sent hampers to the families whose husbands, and mainly husbands, were offshore. And they made sure that the catering team put on a slap-up lunch with alcohol-free beer for Christmas Day. Just things like that. And it transformed the metrics for the change in culture between onshore and offshore was the most dramatic change from that company.
Nice. And if listening is such an easy thing and it can be so transformational, so why do you think it's still an
Exactly.
issue? Is it like a skill issue? Is it a ego issue? Why do you think this is still a problem then? If it's like the reason I'm asking this is because from 8.9 trillion we have moved to 10 million. So definitely there are leaders who are not listening. So I want to know why.
Well,
From your
I can only,
perspective, yeah.
I can only speculate. However, from my experience, I believe it's probably correct that, first of all, it's a lack of awareness. We have to be constantly aware. And I make mistakes. I know I'll sometimes say things that land badly, but what I do, and I encourage all leaders, is just on a daily basis, just reflect for the day. Who did I speak to today? What meetings was I in? Did I actually remember to thank people and comment on things they'd done well? Or did I interrupt? Or did I, for example, did I take over the meeting and just become a little bit dictatorial? And we have to genuinely reflect. And I do this all the time. And I will go back to people and say, I'm sorry, I said something that I think maybe came out the wrong way. Because I'm very passionate, I'm very opinionated. So I do tend to be very enthusiastic and speak too much. And I'm aware of that. And because I'm aware, and even then, even with the job I do, I know I get it wrong. So I think this is one reason it's so difficult, because we don't necessarily have the awareness, but we have to be constantly aware. And the other reason I think it's gone up so dramatically, and again, this is my speculation, there's probably research to support this, but we have this huge global mental health epidemic that's out of control. And a lot of that is because people hate going to work. They're stressed, they're burning out. And I think that's got a lot to do with it. They're unproductive. And the more we have this mantra of do more with less, because it looks good to shareholders month on month. Again, this is my opinion. And
Hmm.
I do intend to do more research on this to see if this is what's causing it. But I believe that that's the problem. The other thing I think is that Gallup said that the biggest group of people that were disengaged last year was middle managers. So I think middle managers are in a very difficult position because they're getting the flack from below and the flack from above. And I think they're maybe struggling. And I'm going to look into that a lot more, but I think that's why the number is going up. I think everyone's struggling with their mental health. And I think that's probably contributing a lot to it.
Right, makes sense. And also, I think you do some exercise in your focus group where you do a good leader and a bad leader. And I really liked what you said in the book, where it's like when you did in the focus group, you had the list of good traits of a leader and then bad traits. Then you should look at the bad traits and reflect. Okay, am I doing any of these things as a
Yeah.
leader that to be
Yeah.
self-aware? So I think to just coming back on your self-awareness point, as anyone listening to this as a leader, like I think that's a good exercise to do, to ask
Yes.
your team like what does a good leader look like and a bad leader, and we reflect on the points as a
Well,
starting point. What do you think?
we even make it a little bit more real life than that. And I'll even do it with an executive leadership team. I've got two flip charts up, and we're going to do a little icebreaker here. So gather around this flip chart here and just think back over your careers yourselves, because you've all had leaders yourselves in the past. Write on this flip chart think about good leaders you've had in the past. What made them good leaders? So they write up all these things, and we haven't done anything to this till this point. Um, this is just an icebreaker at the very beginning. We do our introductions, and then we do this little exercise. So they're writing up things like good listener, gave praise, and all these things that we want. And then they go to the other flip chart and say, now think back over your careers. Now, without mentioning any names, think about bad leaders you've had. What things did they do that made them bad leaders? So it's all some intimidating, arrogant, doesn't listen, my way or the highway, etc., etc. And then when I say, let's just park those for a minute, and then I bring up the transformational leader model, the business acumen, the technical excellence, and the values and behaviors. So we go through that, and then we go back to flip charts and say, let's look at these flip charts. Which circle do these fit into? And of course, they all fit into the values and behaviors circle. So then we have the buy-in. Actually, this is not just nice to do. So, I mean, really all it should be is do the things on this flip chart and don't do the things on that flip chart. And I'll always be a little bit deprecating as well at this point. And I'll look at something out on that flip chart, like has favorites, for example. And I'll say, I ask myself honestly, do I do anything that makes it seem like I'm doing these things? And if I'm really honest with myself, I'll naturally gravitate to outgoing, chatty people because that's what I'm like. Now, that could be then perceived by introverted people that I've got favorites.
Favoritism. Yeah.
And so that's a big, and this is exactly what I mean. We've got to be willing to be honest with ourselves and self-reflect. So I use that as an example to show how I am maybe doing one of the things or two of the things on that chart. Because none of us do all the things on the good chart and all the things on the bad chart. We're generally a mix. But it makes the point that behaviours are the differentiator. So I will then say, I take it as a given that you're already outstanding in terms of your technical excellence and your business acumen. I'm not here to tell you how to do these things. This is what we're going to focus on now. We've seen that it's the differentiator, and we can now make a dent in that $10 trillion shocking number.
Right. And just to wrap up quickly as well, I just have two quick questions for you, like a rapid fire if you want. So if leaders could only did three things after reading Culture Pays, what should it be?
Right. Okay. I could pick from 1,000 things, but I'm going to pick three. I would say make a point of catching people doing something good and commenting on it every day and being specific and genuine. So it might be, Sid, I heard you having a difficult call with a client today. You handled it really well. You kept calm. And I know the person was giving you quite a hard time, but you did a really professional job and you calmed them down naturally by being so professional. Thank you. So make a point of doing something every day, commenting, catching people doing something well and commenting on it. The other thing is keep your value statements handy where you can see them. And just at the end of the day, just have a quick look through them and think to yourself, what did I do that supported that value statement about treating people with dignity and respect? Or what did I do about making sure that we give back to our community? Whatever your values are, we've got a safety culture. What did I do to make sure that people feel safe in every part of their work? So yes, keep your value statements where you can see them and reflect on them. And just get out there and be visible and listen. We have to come out the ivory tower. People will say things to me like, my boss does my appraisal. I haven't seen him for 6 months. So things like that, I would say get out there and be visible. I think those three would go a long way to making a big difference in the culture.
Definitely. And last question for you. And every chapter in the book starts with a quote. So I want to ask you, which is your favorite quote
Oh,
and why?
can I be sneaky and pick two, one for mindset and one for action?
Absolutely.
Right. I would say my favorite, in terms of, it ties in with what I just said about catching people doing something good. One of my favorite quotes is by Tom Peters, who's a legendary management guru. And he said, we wildly underestimate the value of a simple thank you.
Mm,
And I think if we could just remember that people want to feel appreciated, I think, as I say, it ties in with catching people doing something good and commenting. And the other one is by Aristotle. And he said, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not an act, but a habit. So leadership's not, if you substitute leadership for excellence, leadership's not an act, it's a habit. And if we want leadership excellence, we need to get into the habit of doing these small things on an ongoing basis. And then we'll change the world. If we all do that.
yeah, 100%. And just to add mine as well, which I really liked, I think in the book where you were explaining formative feedback and motivation feedback, where you said, not giving feedback is choosing comfort over growth. And that's
Exactly.
so important, right? For me, it
Yeah.
was like, okay, if I'm not giving feedback to someone, even if they did something well or not, it's like I'm choosing comfort over growth. So that's like a really reminder for me that I need to give feedback if I have to.
100%. And, I believe that feedback is the lifeblood of implementing and sustaining positive change. So the most fundamental skill that leaders need to learn is how to give and receive feedback effectively. It is a skill, and embedding that as a culture in the organization. It is the lifeblood. None of us, as I say, intentionally does a bad job, but we need to be good at giving, I call it motivational and formative feedback. So giving motivational feedback on a regular basis, that builds trust that we're being valued and recognized. And then it makes it easier to give the formative feedback. There's just something I'd like to point out, if you don't mind. Are you receptive to a bit of feedback? And, setting the expectation, and just make it a normal part of the culture. And a good place to start, if leaders would like a tip here, is make a point at the end of every single meeting of debriefing it, saying, okay, we've had our meeting now. Let's just spend 5 minutes talking about what did we do well in that meeting? What could we improve on? So, and behaviourally, for example, it could be, Sid, you had some great ideas. You were very enthusiastic. One of those ideas is a game changer. One thing you might want to consider is, with that enthusiasm, you had a tendency to talk over people. And yeah, once you learn to receive feedback as well as giving it, all you would say is, thanks, that's useful. I'll bear that in mind. And then it just becomes a normal part of the process.
100%. And everyone starts saying, okay, could you give me feedback? And then, like you said, again, behavior breeds behavior.
Yes. And I'm hungry for feedback. I've been running some free
Likewise.
master classes recently, and I always say at the end of it, I want your feedback. I want to get this master class right. So please send me your feedback. What did you like about it? What could have been better? And it's so valuable.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Thank you. Thank you, Margaret. And I have to say to our listeners, if you're a leader in our organizations, or if you're interested about leadership, you have to read this book, because it has so many different golden nuggets, so many different chapters that in the podcast, you have just talked about surface level, but you need to buy the book to really get deeper insights, whether that's how to give feedback, how to listen when someone gives you a formative feedback, and how to embed a culture in any organization. So it's a must read for any leader. So, and also, Margaret, thank you for joining the show, and thank you to our listeners as well.
Oh, thank you very much, Sid. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I really appreciate you reading the book and saying so many so kind things about it. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely. See, I embody the second L, which is learn. So this I will be reading the book second time as well, and then we do a part two with my new ideas. So I'll let you know.
Thank you. I think we should mention it is a how-to book. It's full of stories. It's not an
Yeah,
academic
exactly.
read. It's full of stories and short chapters and
And
how-to
case studies.
actions.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you, Margaret.